Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. My name is Jessica. I am the director of the Planetarium, and with me tonight are two familiar faces, but I will still let them introduce themselves. Starting out with to my left, who is going to be doing the show tonight.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
And I'm Eli. I'm a physics undergraduate student at UMD.
So tonight, Lindsay is going to be telling us all about the amazing women who helped basically launch us off the Earth and explore our solar system and the universe beyond. A lot of these women, unless you've maybe are interested in this topic or have some background knowledge, you probably have not heard of, but they were vital, honestly, in the advances that we made. And that's why we want to really highlight them and share them with you. So before I turn it over to Lindsay, if you do have any questions throughout the show tonight, leave them down in the comments. Eli and I will be watching those, and we'll get questions as soon as we can once we see them, or we'll also take some time at the end of the show to answer those questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Lindsay.
Okay. Okay. So, welcome to the herstory of spaceflight. We are going to be starting out talking about the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You may have also heard of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, referred to as JPL. Now it is part of NASA, but it actually was its own organization back when it was first founded in the like 1940s. They actually started out with their rockets um, uh, with weapons attached to kind of help with the war effort a little bit in World War II and afterward, before finally trying to send rockets up into space. And they also joined NASA. Okay, so this is from 1953. So at this point, they're still working on military missiles. And so this group of women were the human computers. So they calculated trajectories, they calculated fuel ratios necessary for the missiles. And so they did also all of these calculations with a pencil and paper. I think that is probably a little more difficult than the men who were just coming up with the ideas. So part of the reason, there's a couple of reasons why people think that so many women were able to be a part of JPL. One of those is that just in general, it was a more casual work environment than NASA was. Many of them did not have college degrees, but they just loved math, and so they came to JPL to do this. Also, a lot of the men who did try to come in and be human computers, they just didn't really fit into the group very well. This group was kind of like a family, and even if there was a woman that came in and got hired and just didn't jive with the rest of the group, they didn't usually last long. So even though they were calculating all of the trajectories for all of the rocket launches, they weren't actually allowed to watch any of the rocket launches. And then they also were forced to quit anytime they got pregnant. Usually they were hired back, but not always. Okay, so this woman here is Sylvia Lundy. We'll actually get to her in more detail in a few more slides. So So far, JPL has been dealing with military missiles. Well, the U.S. Navy, or actually the U.S. government, wanted to try to start to get into space. And so they asked the U.S. Navy to make this Jupiter C rocket. JPL also put out an idea for getting a rocket into space, but they were not picked initially because of all of their history with making those military missiles. They thought that that would kind of cause some issues with the public. So we have this Jupiter C rocket built by the US Navy. Well, it ended up exploding. And so JPL luckily was building this other rocket kind of in secret, the Vanguard project. And so this actually did make it up into space and also released the first couple experiments into space. So one was kind of looking at radiation in space, and then another was a satellite trying to figure out how to kind of read signals coming in from space and tell they're from space and not from all of the other like radios. Okay, so Macy Roberts, she was the supervisor of this computing group. So there she is right there. And so yeah, she was the one that kind of that hired all of these females. She was also a little worried that if she hired men, they wouldn't listen to her, even though she was their supervisor, since she was a woman. Okay, this is Barbara Paulson, and here she is in this picture. She's getting her 10-year pin. She actually worked at JPL for 45 years, starting in 1948. Of course, she started working on those military missiles, and then she also worked on Mariner probes that went to Venus and Mercury. But she says her favorite mission that she worked on was the Viking mission. Okay, so this woman in the middle here, that's Janez Lawson. She was the only woman and the only Black person in her engineering classes. She saw the ad for these JPL computers at her school, and since it didn't mention the need to have any college degree on the ad, she knew that it probably was for women and that she could go be a computer at NASA or at JPL. So she actually ended up getting her engineering degree after taking all of her classes. But despite that, she was not allowed to work as an engineer. She had to keep being a human computer for JPL. Okay, so this is Sylvia Lundy. So she, among other things, but one of the coolest things that she did was help plot the trajectories for the Voyager spacecraft. So the Voyager spacecraft launched from Earth, and then Voyager 1 needed to go kind of fly by Jupiter and Saturn, and then it would kind of go out into the outer solar system. But Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune needed to be in the path for Voyager 2. So she was the one that calculated all of these trajectories. So as you kind of go towards a planet, you can use its gravity to kind of adjust your path a little bit as you go. So she calculated, how close to get to the planets. The closer you get, the more gravitational pull you get. And all of these trajectories that were needed to get to all of the different planets. Okay, Sue Finley. She has been working for JPL for 60 years. She is currently 81. She also did not have any college degree, but she really loved numbers. She worked on the Mariner probe. She was a part of the Deep Space Network in the 1980s. Her favorite mission was Venera, which was a mission to Venus. This spacecraft in this picture is Juno. It is currently orbiting around Jupiter. And so that was kind of her most current project that she has worked on. Okay, next we're going to talk about the Mercury 13. So they were a group of female pilots. And of course, at the time, NASA was recruiting astronauts from a group of male pilots. And so they thought, well, maybe we can be astronauts also. So this next video is going to kind of explain kind of all the testing they went through and why they actually ended up not being able to become official astronauts.
While the Americans were recruiting astronauts, the Soviets continued to rack up firsts in space. In 1963, they launched Valentina Tereshkova, their first female cosmonaut. She flew 48 orbits. At the Lovelace Clinic in New Mexico, a top-secret program was underway to recruit a corps of female astronauts. They were dubbed the Mercury 13. Well, they did extraordinarily well in the tests, and they surpassed the men in some ways. And that was a function of their different body type. And they wound up with 20 or so ladies that were all suitable candidates. And of those 20 or 24 that took the tests, 13 were found to be adequate and appropriate candidates for the space program. It didn't happen because they were 20 years ahead of their time. The program never received any kind of encouragement from NASA. In fact, active steps were taken to quash it. And so the ladies who had been given tremendous stimulation, and they were all very excited about being astronauts, and everybody at Lovelace thought they were going to be astronauts, were suddenly told that they couldn't be. Jerry Cobb and her team were ready and eager to fly when the program was suddenly halted. No explanation was ever given to them, although the orders apparently came from the highest level. I've seen the copy of a memo from Vice President Lyndon Johnson in which he was requiring James Webb to look into the suitability of women as candidates for space. And in Lyndon Johnson's handwriting across the bottom, instead of a signature, was the phrase, "Let's put a stop to this now." And that apparently was the death knell of the Mercury 13's aspirations to go into space. Most of them never knew about this till years later, but they never gave up. To this day, they still are looking for a ride. They want to go in space. There's no difference in capability of pilots, whether women or men. But the problem was there were no women with experience in research and development. So you pick the guys with experience in research and development. And that's just a smart way of doing it. Valentina Tereshkova would be the last woman in space until Sally Ride boarded an American space shuttle 2 decades later. By the end of 1963, the total number of astronauts had risen to 30. They'd all be vying for the 20 available seats on Gemini.
So you heard somebody say in that one of the reasons um, they did not end up picking these female candidates was because the male candidates had experience in research and development in the military. Well, the reason that they didn't have any women with experience in research and development in the military is because women in the military were not allowed to be in research and development. So they were just kind of blocked from all sorts of directions. Okay, now we are going to take a look at NASA, some hidden figures there during the Apollo program. So here we have Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson. Dorothy Vaughan, she started out as a human computer at NASA. And she ended up becoming the supervisor of the West Area Computers, which was a group of African American female computers. So eventually, you know, computers, actual digital electronic computers, ended up coming to NASA. And so she saw that eventually her group probably was going to not be needed anymore. So she became the expert on those new computers, electronic computers at NASA, and also taught all of the women in her group to be experts at the new computers also. So they would still have jobs when these new electronic computers came in. Katherine Johnson, she was also a mathematician at NASA. She started out in the West Computing group, but eventually she was recruited to kind of do more complex calculations. So she helped astronauts get into space for the first time, go into orbit, and then finding a trajectory to kind of get back down to Earth. So she worked on the Project Mercury space flights with astronauts like Alan Shepard and John Glenn. And then she also worked on the Apollo program. Mary Jackson, she was also a mathematician, but she ended up going to school to try to be an engineer. She was the only woman and only Black person in her classes. But eventually she did get her engineering degree. And so she worked at NASA as its first Black female engineer. She was there for 34 years. And eventually she became the top engineering administrator at NASA. And they all have received congressional gold medals. Katherine Johnson, here she is getting hers from Obama. She also has a building named after her now. And so does Mary Jackson. So this is Margaret Hamilton.
I have a quick question, and I may be getting ahead and spoiling something, but wasn't one of the hidden figures, didn't she also like check the computer's work?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was Katherine Johnson. Yeah, she before John Glenn went up into space, he wanted her to check the calculations for his trajectory to make sure that the new electronic computers were correct. Yes. Okay, so Margaret Hamilton is pretty awesome. She was a software engineer. You can see here all of the printed computer code that she worked on. And here she is kind of laying in the mock pit for the Apollo missions. And I'm going to have her talk about herself and her accomplishments in this video because it is one of my favorite videos ever, even though I've seen it probably like 50 times now.
They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. And I just thought, wow, I've got to go there. I grew up in the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Upper Peninsula. I just enjoyed school, but there was something about math that I just liked more than everything else. I liked deriving the answers because I didn't want to memorize. It was too much. I was lazy. When my husband was in law school, they wanted the law wives, my being one of them, to pour tea. And I said to my husband, no way am I pouring tea. As a Harvard law wife, if I go to Harvard Law School, fine, I'll do what the men do, but I'm not going to be put in that position. And he was very proud of me that I had taken that stand. They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. I was the first programmer they hired. I came up with the term software engineering, and it was considered a joke. What? Software is engineering? Mostly men were working there, and they had somebody at home to take care of their kids. I had no choice. I'd bring my daughter, Lauren, into work nights and weekends, and she'd see me playing astronaut to test the software and doing the kinds of things the astronaut would do. So she wanted to do it too, so she played astronaut. And all of a sudden, everything came crashing on the simulator. And I realized that what she had done is that she selected the pre-launch program. During flight, I said, oh my God, this is not good. We really need to put a protection in there because the astronaut really could do what she did by mistake. I tried to get it through MIT, NASA. No, they said, astronauts are trained never to make a mistake. There was an emergency. Everything happened that we thought would happen if they made the mistake. So then there was a decision, go, no go, land or don't land. Fortunately, the people at Mission Control trusted our software and they said, go, go, go. The software and the hardware worked perfectly. The software was on the ground and on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Your example speaks of the American spirit of discovery that exists in every little girl and little boy who know that somehow to look beyond the heavens is to look deep within ourselves.
Being fearless, even when the experts say, no, it doesn't make sense. They didn't believe it. Nobody did. It was something that we were dreaming of happening, but it became real.
I swear, chills every time I see this video.
Every time.
That's really good.
I also can't help but laugh when she talks about being too lazy to memorize equations, so she just derives them.
Yeah.
I mean,
That sounds like it was spoken by a math professor.
Okay. Well, there were a few other women around at this time. So Joanne Morgan, she was actually in mission control for the Apollo program. She was the only woman there. And she she was an instrumentation controller for Apollo 11. She started out as an engineer's aide for the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, which was kind of the precursor to NASA. And then when the government was starting up NASA, some of the kind of administrators that were starting at NASA, they knew who Joanne Morgan was and knew that she was really good at her job. And she actually didn't even have an engineering degree yet. She was still getting her degree while she was working at NASA. And so she, as she was working at NASA, you know, she would try to go into the mission control, and then the men would kick her out because they just assumed that there's no way that she could work there because she's a woman. She would also get derogatory things said to her sometimes. Luckily, her supervisor was a big kind of force for her to kind of help support her and, you know, tell the men to, like, you know, quiet down and be nice. Poppy Northcutt. She was the first woman to serve as an engineer for the Apollo program. And she ended up creating the calculations for part of Apollo 8's flight trajectory. She also helped bring the Apollo 8 astronauts back home safely. She also worked on Apollo 10, 11, 12, and 13. She was on the team of engineers that helped get Apollo 13 back to Earth. So if you haven't heard the story of Apollo 13, which I realize might be more common now since the movie now is like 30 years old or something like that.
It blows my
So,
mind. I remember that movie so well.
yes. So Apollo 13 had some issues with its launch. And so some parts got broken, basically. And so they were unable to land on the moon. And so because of that, and also because their original like trajectory to get them back to Earth had accounted for all of the rocks and things that they were going to collect on the moon. So now that they didn't have all of those rocks on the moon because they couldn't land on the moon, they had to refigure out their trajectory to get them back safely. So she was part of the engineers that helped with that. Ethel Heineke Bauer, she was also part of the group of engineers that worked on getting the Apollo 13 astronauts back to Earth. She worked on the mission analysis section. Margaret Brennicke was sort of kind of like a material engineer. So she was really good at sort of combining different metals together to see kind of what combinations of metals would be best in different parts, you know, of the rocket. And so she was crucial in kind of figuring out what sort of aluminum alloys ended up getting used in the rockets. Barbara Crawford Johnson, she helped with the trajectories of the Apollo command modules. So the previous two women that I talked about the working on the Apollo trajectories, they worked more on the kind of from Earth to the moon. And then they all kind of worked on getting Apollo 13 back. But Barbara Johnson, she specifically worked on getting from the moon to the Earth for the Apollo missions. Billy Robertson. She actually had been working at NASA for a really long time too. That very first rocket that was made to go into space that failed, the Jupiter C rocket, she was kind of on the team for that. And then she helped create some of the first computer models for launches and wrote manuals explaining how to use some of these new computer systems. Judy Sullivan, she kind of worked in biomedical engineering. So she helped create the sensors and things that were in the space suits so that you could tell the astronauts' vitals and if they were healthy and if they were having any problems. So she was able to be so the biomedical engineers, they were not in mission control. They were kind of in a different room, but she was at her station watching those sensors during the flights. Okay, so the first female in space, we saw her a little bit already. She was Valentina Tereshkova from the Soviet Union. She went up into space on June 16th, 1963. To this day, she holds the record for youngest woman in space at age 26, and she still holds the record for the only woman to make a solo space flight. The Russians also sent up Svetlana Svetskaya in 1982. She was the first woman on a space station, the first woman to do a spacewalk, and then the first woman to do 2 space flights. So now for some American female astronauts. So Sally Ride was the first American woman in space. She went up in 1983. Catherine D. Sullivan, she was the first American woman to perform a spacewalk. That was in 1984. Shannon Lucid, her mission was in 1985. She was the first Chinese-born woman in space and the first woman to do at least 3 space flights. Millie Hughes Fulford in 1991 became the first female payload specialist. Eileen Collins in 1999 was the first female space shuttle commander. Peggy Whitson, she holds the record for the oldest female spacewalker at age 47. She also spent the longest amount of time in space. If you add in all of the days that all of the astronauts spent in space, she has spent the most total amount of time in space at 665 days. And then so that puts her in 8th place for time in space among all of the astronauts, both male and female. Christina Cook, she has the record for longest time for a woman in space all at one time. And that was 328 days at once. So she went up to the space station March 14th, 2019, and then came back down to Earth February 6th in 2020. She was also a part of the all-female spacewalk, which I will show you guys in just a minute. The other woman that was in this was Jessica Muir. Oops.
Seeing Jessica Muir make not her first steps, but her first float out of the hatch there.
Hello, United States.
Congratulations, Christina and Jessica, on this historic event. What you do is really something very special. So first the moon, and then we go to Mars.
For us, it's just coming out here and doing our job today. We were the crew that was tasked with this assignment. At the same time, we recognize that it is a historic achievement, And we do, of course, want to give credit to all of those that came before us. There's been a long line of female scientists, explorers, engineers, and astronauts, and we have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today. Go women!
And it just so happens that we have the right people doing the right job at the right time. And in fact, this is historic because those two right people are women.
It's been 100 years that we've had the right to vote this year. So this year, while we celebrate that, we also check another box, women doing spacewalks. And the next one, the big one, is for us to walk on the moon.
This is a milestone. It symbolizes exploration by all that dare to dream and work hard to achieve that dream. We hope an inspiration to all future explorers.
That was a super exciting, more recent achievement. There also is a new class of astronauts. This is for the upcoming Artemis missions. You can see quite a few women and also many skin colors. So it's exciting to see a group of astronauts with this much diversity. If you want to learn more about female achievements in space and with rockets, these are some of the books that I read. Rise of the Rocket Girls were about those women that were at JPL, Galaxy Girls, the Mercury 13, and then another book about the Mercury 13 almost astronauts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. And I mean, I know each of us have seen this before, but I still love this show every time I see it.
I'm doing it.
All right, well, if you have any questions for us, now is a great time to leave them down in the comments. While I give that a couple minutes to see if we get any questions coming in, let me tell you a little bit about what's coming up. Although I guess it's not too much to say because next week we are taking the week off from our regular streaming since staff are going to be heading home for the Thanksgiving holiday. And also, I think we all just need a little bit of a break. We've been doing this since, what, end of March? So we are going to take next week off, but we will be back the week after the first week of December, believe it or not, with our usual beginning of the month. So we'll have What's Up in December and our constellation story time for December. Another thing to note while we are in this kind of time of thanks and giving, the Planetarium is still selling our Stellar Distancing t-shirts to help us raise money since we have been closed since mid-March. These proceeds go to help us continue to do these live stream events, to pay my wonderful students for all of the work that they've been doing, putting into developing these live stream shows and also developing shows that we're excited to show you once we can open the Planetarium again. So if you enjoy what we do and are able to help support us, we would very much appreciate it. And with that, Eli, are you seeing anything come in? Because I know sometimes you see comments that I don't.
Nope, nothing coming.
All right. Well, thank you again, Lindsay, for the amazing show. If you liked this and want to learn more, we do have another Herstory show, the Herstory of Astronomy, which is some of the amazing women astronomers over the centuries. You go back pretty far, which I'm sure I can convince Lindsay to do again in the near future. I'm sure it won't take much convincing. But until then, we hope that you enjoyed the show tonight. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Have a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving. And we will see you first week of December. So until then, bye everyone.